Okay. In the last session, we talked about the universal laws cannot be reduced to specifically defined rules at the technical level, right? And that was what the first Chinese characters or kanji meant in Daoism. That was the first six character of the first line in the first paragraph. Uh, that was the eighth session, and we finally arrived at the first six Chinese characters. Yeah, it's a lot to absorb and to understand, and hopefully you can relate or even somehow connect uh, in a what we mentioned as the sudden realization or sudden enlightenment. So my first seven preparatory sessions before the eighth session to actually, you know, talk about the first Chinese characters, the first six ones. Um, I hope those first seven helped. So, uh, but let's talk about the Taoism itself because basically, Dao De Jing was the framework, the foundation for Taoism. At the Dao level. Okay, it was basically very, very high above that level. Okay, so Taoism, first let's talk about why it was even necessary. Remember, most commoners, the ancient Chinese society taxpayers who basically support all the empires, they were Chinese illiterate. Okay, so even if they had that in their life, they didn't know it. Okay, at least they didn't know that was Taoism or whatever. Just the wisdom. It was not so abstract, so high above, and at a so deep level. Nah, they just have it, or they had it, to direct their daily life. They didn't know what it was. But for the Chinese elite, the Chinese gentleman, that was different because all the Chinese gentlemen, all the Chinese elites back then, they work in the royal court for the empress, right? Just a different ranking level or pay pay scale. Um, Imagine them day in day out struggling, right? Trying to survive the court political struggles, and with all that stress, when you come home, retreat to your private chamber, do you still want to think about the politics? Of course you don't. And at the center of the politics, the whole thing of basically the royal court rule, the policy, all that, was all that driven by Confucianism. So when you come home, let's face it, you're sick and tired of all that Confucianism. You know, you're tired. So when you retrieve to your own private chamber, what do you really want to, basically concentrate on? Daoism. Because what that is in contemporary America, you go to see psychiatrists, basically you're on the couch and you keep talking. I don't know what the other guy or lady supposed to listening. Every once in a while might say something back to you. I don't know, because I was never in one of those sessions. Why? I don't need it. I got a Taoism for me, right? So this was back then available to the Chinese gentleman. Basically, strike the perfect balance. You forget about, at least that was a temporary escape from the royal court politics, so you can concentrate on your I guess it was called self-purifying, self-improving studies. And basically that study, you can be reading a lot, and you travel when you have the opportunity and chance. Typically you cannot just leave your post and just go somewhere. You get your head chopped off for that. But when you on the official business, of course you could. And they travel, make you basically open your eyes. A lot of things you read before, and all of a sudden it just come back and hit you. Wait, that makes sense, right? So anyway, you travel, you read, but it's not just that. I already mentioned. You do the music making, you do poetry, you do your calligraphy, and you do the ink brush painting. All that practices to what? To purify, you know, the state of mind. To do what? Okay, so back then there were two things that basically was all the gentlemen, Chinese, gentlemen, uh, they had to live by. What are the two things, or what were the two things? One, when you are at the position to reach out and help the whole world, that's your duty. You got to do that. But before you get there, what you do? You purify yourself, okay, in this self improving study, lifelong journey. Maybe you never get to the position to help the whole wide world, but at least you promise you don't want to be a problem for the society. At least you want to be noble. You want to be, uh, you know, uh, purified. So what does all that mean? That means if you are such a selfish and complete, self-centered person, because of that greed, because of that vanity, you will come up with all kind of genius, schema to try to scheme, to game the society, you know, that's what would you do. So, but if you are purified, self-improved, you kind of, elevate continually to the next level, you're above and beyond all that greed, all that vanity. And that's what you can do for yourself and for the society on the whole, right? If every Chinese gentleman were doing that collectively, what a better society could that be, right? Now, what the Taoism teaching will tell you is you don't want any of that vanity, not because, oh, I just want to be noble, I want to be so perceived as a noble man. No, because if you have this greed, always want something, and all this vanity driven thing, you're chasing after that rainbow, you never be happy, right? Say, because back then, the pay grade, they have the supposedly 9, but they have the, 9, and then they have the minus. Okay, so that's altogether, I forgot how many. Uh, Probably 14 or 15 or 16 or whatever. I don't even remember. But anyway, so when you were at the entry level, right? Typically, it was back then it was 3 level of court official credential exams. The first was at the local level. The second was at the provincial level. And the third and the final level, it was in the capital city of the nation or state. You pass all the three. Okay, you pass all the three, and then and typically it was like anywhere between 140 to 300. Sometimes it reached, rarely, but it reached like 400 per final exam. Candidates, eventually prevailed, became, the candidates for the royal court commissioning placement, right? So those would be, categorized into 3 different classes. The top class, they would be placed, at the talent reserve, and they would be checked into the royal level study and HR training per se in today's term. And then second level, they would be placed. They would be placed into the cabinet administrator. There were back then 6 of them, and 3 committees. So altogether 9 government agencies for the royal court. And the third class, basically, they were sent out to the provincial level positions. So this basically was was where the beginning of a royal court career. And of course, with the vanity, you want to, oh, I want to go climb up, and of course, there's ladders, and that could be something really painful for you, going through the entire professional life at the royal court and the provincial government, of the court. And back then, the ancient Chinese society was structured with, the I guess the social standing. Of course, the royalty, the monarch of the empire, next empire, they would not carry any significance other than being, hunted down and killed, entirely wiped out. But then the nobility basically attached to the monarch, somehow they were related, or at the time this empire was being created, those were basically the people, had a lot done for the future empress, right? So as reward, they were given some kind of nobility titles and privilege and all that, right? So then there were, of course, the commoners, but in between the monarch and the nobilities and the commoners, in between were the gentlemen. So basically, the empire came and went. So the royalties, the monarchs, the nobility, they also came and went with the empires. The gentlemen, though, they always stay. They don't stay on the individual level, because when the empire was gone, basically, they are, no use for the old empire, and the new empire would not use them because they're loyalty to the old empire. That's on the individual level, though. But the gentlemen, as a class, as a social group, they always stay. Okay, so they stay with what? With the way to manage, to admin a legal state or a empire. The policy, royal court policies, and all that. So these people, the system, no matter what empire came and went, the system still stayed as the same. It was always the Confucianism that basically, was the criteria to test those candidates, the future officials, and they stay as the social group regardless the empire, came and went, right? What that means it doesn't matter which royal family of which empire. It didn't really matter because the same system stayed. Okay, in between all empire, the Chinese empire in the ancient Chinese history, it didn't even matter much about the this family had this, that. No, they all believed and promoted the same Confucianism, the system, right? So in that sense, that was the stability, okay? The first empire came in, and then eventually, because they were so corrupted, and they failed the expectation of the taxpayers, to the point that the taxpayer could not even manage 3 meals a day. And then boom, people rose up and they basically topped over the empires and replaced with a brand new one, right? But this is just basically the cycle, again. But then in the meantime, the same system stayed for about 1,000 years, until Manchurian Empire went out and the First Republic came in. So that was that. And now think about, with all this, when you come back home as the Chinese elite, of course the Daoism offers the peace of mind that I repeated so many times throughout the sessions. Imagine back then how much pressure. I mean, you would think, back then it's just such a peaceful, relaxed lifestyle, right? No. again, we use Japan as an analogy, right? So the people might be able to relate to, because in the contemporary Chinese society, it doesn't exist anymore. It's different kind of pressure. But I remember when my kid was about becoming a teenager, I sent her to Japan to stay with my friends there, and she stayed, I don't remember, 5 6 weeks, and she came back, and I asked her, I was like, honey, what do you think of Japan? Oh, I love it. I love it. Everybody is so polite and blah blah blah. She went on, but at the end she said, I, I enjoyed being there as a guest, but I would not want to live there as a Japanese. And I'm like, why, honey? And then this is what she said. She said, it's too much to be a Japanese in that society. You have to worry about this, you have to worry about that. Too much, too much, too much pressure. But in old China, it was even worse than today's Japan. Okay, I don't know how old it was, how sophisticated, but I remember when I was a little kid. Remember, I mentioned about this great cultural illusion. That is vicious thing, uh, totally inhumane. But anyway, I survived. So because my family background, politically, uh, just put it this way, my parents wanted to hide me somewhere safer, so sent me to my grandparents on my mother's side. My grandparents came from two different Manchurian banners. For those who probably heard a little bit about it, is Manchurians all their life they were attached to a banner. Okay, altogether there were supposed to be 8 Manchurian banner, but then there was a Han banner, there was a Mongolian banner, so 8 plus 3 7, altogether 24 banners, right? So each banner, uh, you know, solid red, solid white, solid yellow, solid blue, and then expanded later into laced red, laced yellow, laced white, laced blue. And then they also had this saying back then, they called it upper 3, lower 5. Upper 3 referred to the solid yellow, the laced yellow, and the laced white. Why upper 3? These 3 were directly controlled by the first Manchurian emperor came into Beijing from northeast part of China. And then the other 5 basically were not related to the first emperor, Shunzhi emperor. So the laced yellow was the one that Shunzhi emperor himself came out from, or attached to, the breed or the bloodline, whatever, associated with. So on my grandfather's side, which is on my mother's side, my grandfather on my mother's side, they were attached to the Manchurian lace yellow, which was basically the one Shunzhi emperor was. And then on my mother's side, they were attached to the solid red, which is the first out of the lower 5, okay, because they were all ranked. So my grandfather, my grandmother on my mother's side, they were separately attached to different Manchurian banners. And of course, they have been in Beijing for several hundred years. Okay, so back then, if you visit a Chinese household in Beijing that came from such a background, okay, there are a lot of protocols and procedures. Man, I remember when my parents put me there because my father was locked up for his political views. He was officially categorized as the rightist. People on the left, people on the right. He was a rightist, and I was basically not allowed to step outside the house of my grandparents on my mother's side. I stayed in for 7 months. Jesus, that was suffocating, I would say, at least, because their lifestyle, it was something, it was really a culture shock because my father grew up in a British funded Christian boarding school. So you could imagine that value has nothing to do with the Manchurian thing. And the Manchurian, their cultural protocol. You couldn't say anything you wanted to say. Okay, you have to observe. And basically, I was the youngest person in the entire household during the 7 months. There was no time that I could find that was my place to talk at all. Okay, just shut up. Don't open your mouth until you're talked to. That was that. And all this, Jesus, that was because my grandfather on my mother's side did not believe I had a proper upbringing, with the given father who I'll just stop there. And just constantly criticize me. And of course, physically, spank you. That was kind, not spanking. That 7 months, I look forward because that was worse than jail. I didn't know what jail was. I knew my father was locked up, but Jesus Christ. And that was Manchurian lifestyle, okay? If I knew back then I could learn about this Daoism, maybe that would be some comfort, but gee, I knew I didn't want to grow up in a Manchurian household, and that's what my mother actually, that was her background. Funny thing, I never could tell because she was so rebellious. She left that household when she was 16. So I never saw that in my mother until I was, placed in the tight control, under the tight control of my grandparents on my mother's side. So anyway, I was just trying to give you a little idea. The old China, my goodness, you needed Taoism because otherwise it would have been so much to bear. Or maybe because we're contemporary, we have a lot of things to compare to, but back then you never had any choice. Maybe that was the only way available, just like in the Japanese today. Do you have any choice? A little bit. I think the Japanese started to change too, because today you hear the Japanese talking about 本当ね、やっぱり、面白いね. Meaning, gee, that was so interesting. But in Japanese, interesting doesn't mean weird. It means like, wow, that is intriguing, So at least the Japanese, I think, today started try to fight all this boring, stuff. And I am, I'm a Chinaman. I'm an old school stuff, person. But do I like all this, old school stuff? Like I just mentioned, this Manchurian household lifestyle. I'm not so sure. But do I like the way the contemporary Chinese, the way they bring up their kids today or the grandkids? I don't know about that either. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we need to preserve certain things, but we'll leave a little personal room for people to see where is the fit and where do you, stop. Stuff like that. I'll talk about more of this in the future sessions. So bye for now.